As he assumed office in 1961, John F. Kennedy made it clear that he hoped to arouse the kind of enthusiasm for fresh and dynamic national innovations which had characterized the famous first 100 days of Franklin D. Roosevelt's New Deal. An able, young, and imaginative administrative team arrived in Washington with their able, young, and imaginative president. All came with a great variety of new ideas. But from the very beginning, the domestic concerns of the nation were thrust in the background as the new administration was forced to meet an almost endless succession of fresh emergencies abroad. Shortly after President Kennedy took office, he had to make a decision about an invasion of communist Cuba by anti-Castro exiles. The invasion had been under preparation since before he became president. The puzzle of Kennedy's decision and his execution of it will be discussed by historians for years to come. The vital question, after deciding to go ahead at all, was whether to give the mere battalion of exiles active support by the air and naval forces of the United States itself. Kennedy elected not to permit U.S. air or naval support. The invasion, whatever might have been its fate otherwise, was thereby doomed. If Cuba, in the first year of the Kennedy administration, represented a country already committed in the most frustrating way to communism, other countries, still free throughout the world, were facing heavy communist pressure. Crises in Laos and Vietnam, in the Congo, and in the narrow waters dividing Red China from the nationalist stronghold on Formosa continually engaged Kennedy's attention and required his continual vigilance and ingenuity. But throughout his administration, the most hazardous emergencies repeatedly arose in West Berlin. Confronted in the summer of 1961 with a Russian ultimatum to evacuate Western troops, Kennedy flatly refused. In a major address to the nation, he called for a great strengthening of the nation's conventional armed forces in Europe and elsewhere. Said the president,
"We face a challenge in Berlin, but there is also a challenge in Southeast Asia, where the borders are less guarded, the enemy harder to find, and the dangers of communism less apparent to those who have so little. I hear it said that West Berlin is militarily untenable, and so was Bastogne, and so in fact was Stalingrad. Any dangerous spot is tenable if men, brave men, will make it so. We seek peace, but we shall not surrender. 3 times in my lifetime, our country and Europe have been involved in major wars. In each case, serious misjudgments were made on both sides of the intentions of others, which brought about great devastation. Now, in the thermonuclear age, any misjudgment on either side about the intentions of the other could rain more devastation in several hours than has been wrought in all the wars of human history. I know that sometimes we get impatient. We wish for some immediate action that would end our perils. But I must tell you that there is no quick and easy solution. The communists control over 1 billion people, and they recognize that if we should falter, their success would be imminent. We must look to long days ahead, which, if we are courageous and persevering, can bring us what we all desire. In meeting my responsibilities in these coming months as president, I need your goodwill and your support, and above all, your prayers.
Kennedy's firm stand on Berlin in the first year of office ended for the remainder of his administration any major effort by the Soviet Union to force the Western powers out of their sector of Berlin. In 1962, however, the communist regime in East Germany succeeded without any effective U.S. opposition in erecting a wall which sealed off West Berlin from the communist sector and became an international symbol of the closed communist society. Early that year, Kennedy found time to engage in a domestic struggle. Through considerable pressure on the nation's steel union, the president managed to secure a wage settlement with the major steel companies, which involved an unusually small increase in pay. It was part of a program urged by the president to restrain inflation and had been coupled with a long-standing plea by the president to the steel companies to keep their prices stable. The ink was hardly dry on the union contract when the president of U.S. Steel, followed quickly by most other steel executives, announced a major price increase. The following day at a news conference, the president delivered what is generally regarded as the angriest statement he ever made in office.
Simultaneous and identical actions of United States Steel and other leading steel corporations increasing steel prices by some $6 a ton constitute a wholly unjustifiable and irresponsible defiance of the public interest. In this serious hour in our nation's history, at a time when restraint and sacrifice are being asked of every citizen, the American people will find it hard, as I do, to accept a situation in which a tiny handful of steel executives whose pursuit of private power and profit exceeds their sense of public responsibility can show such utter contempt for the interests of 185 million Americans.
Within a week, the steel industry responded by rolling back the announced increases. The president's action led to a long period of tension between the White House and the business community, a tension which gradually eased, but never quite returned to what it had been before the President of the United States and the President of United States Steel had their historic confrontation. The fall of 1962 brought the greatest of all the confrontations of the Kennedy administration. In October, the President received certain proof that the Soviet Union had established bases for nuclear missiles in Cuba. Addressing the nation on this occasion, he announced a naval blockade of the island, forcing ships carrying Russian arms to Cuba to return, and implied strongly that the United States would bomb and, if necessary, invade Cuba unless the missiles were withdrawn. This was the somber conclusion of President Kennedy's address on the Cuban blockade.
My fellow citizens, let no one doubt that this is a difficult and dangerous effort on which we have set out. No one can foresee precisely what course it will take, or what costs or casualties will be incurred. Many months of sacrifice and self-discipline lie ahead, months in which both our patience and our will be tested, months in which many threats and denunciations will keep us aware of our dangers. But the greatest danger of all would be to do nothing. The path we have chosen for the present is full of hazards, as all paths are. But it is the one most consistent with our character and courage as a nation and our commitments around the world. The cost of freedom is always high, but Americans have always paid it. And one path we shall never choose, and that is the path of surrender or submission. Our goal is not the victory of might, but the vindication of right. Not peace at the expense of freedom, but both peace and freedom here in this hemisphere, and we hope around the world. God willing, that goal will be achieved.
After a great deal of confusion in Moscow and of equally obvious resentment in Havana, the Soviet Union finally complied with the major part of President Kennedy's demand. Surprisingly, perhaps, the Soviet-American showdown over Cuba led to a period of relatively relaxed tension in the Cold War. And 1963 was the first year in which domestic events suddenly took priority in the minds of most Americans and President Kennedy, their national leader. In Birmingham, Alabama, Negroes, aroused to an unprecedented peak by a century of racial discrimination, began a series of demonstrations against the local and state governments. The situation quickly reached riot proportions as the governments of Birmingham and Alabama tried to quell these demonstrations with force. The year before, Mr. Kennedy, like President Eisenhower, had acted vigorously in a civil rights crisis by sending first federal marshals and finally federal troops into Oxford, Mississippi, to ensure the admission of a Negro student to the hitherto all-white campus of the University of Mississippi. As the campaign for the civil rights of Negro Americans reached national proportions, the president again used federal troops to force the integration of the University of Alabama. This was the occasion for perhaps his most important speech in office. a speech solemnly committing all the energies of the national government to the eradication of racial barriers in education, housing, jobs, and public places. It was the occasion, too, for the President to propose the strongest civil rights measure considered by Congress in nearly a century. Here in its entirety is that speech by President Kennedy.
Following a series of threats and defiant statements, the presence of Alabama National Guardsmen was required on the University of Alabama to carry out the final and unequivocal order of the United States District Court of the Northern District of Alabama. That order called for the admission of two clearly qualified young Alabama residents who happened to have been born Negro. That they were admitted peacefully on the campus is due in good measure to the conduct of the students of the University of Alabama who met their responsibilities in a constructive way. I hope that every American, regardless of where he lives, will stop and examine his conscience about this and other related incidents. This nation was founded by men of many nations and backgrounds. It was founded on the principle that all men are created equal, and that the rights of every man are diminished when the rights of one man are threatened. Today we are committed to a worldwide struggle to promote and protect the rights of all who wish to be free. And when Americans are sent to Vietnam or West Berlin, we do not ask for whites only. It ought to be possible, therefore, for American students of any color to attend any public institution they select without having to be backed up by troops. It ought to be possible for American consumers of any color to receive equal service in places of public accommodation, such as hotels and restaurants and theaters and retail stores, without being forced to resort to demonstrations in the street. And it ought to be possible for American citizens of any color to register and to vote in a free election without interference or fear of reprisal. It ought to be possible, in short, for every American to enjoy the privileges of being American without regard to his race or his color. In short, every American ought to have the right to be treated as he would wish to be treated, as one would wish his children to be treated. But this is not the case. The Negro baby born in America today, regardless of the section of the state in which he is born, has about 1/2 as much chance of completing a high school as a white baby, born in the same place on the same day. 1/3 as much chance of completing college. 1/3 as much chance of becoming a professional man. Twice as much chance of becoming unemployed. About 1/7 as much chance of earning $10,000 a year. A life expectancy which is 7 years shorter, and the prospects of earning only half as much. This is not a sectional issue. Difficulties over segregation and discrimination exist in every city, in every state of the Union, producing in many cities a rising tide of discontent that threatens the public safety. Nor is this a partisan issue. In a time of domestic crisis, men of goodwill and generosity should be able to unite regardless of party or politics. This is not even a legal or legislative issue alone. It is better to settle these matters in the courts than on the streets, and new laws are needed at every level. But law alone cannot make men see right. We are confronted primarily with a moral issue. It is as old as the scriptures and is as clear as the American Constitution. The heart of the question is whether all Americans are to be afforded equal rights and equal opportunities, whether we are going to treat our fellow Americans as we want to be treated. If an American, because his skin is dark, cannot eat lunch in a restaurant open to the public, if he cannot send his children to the best public school available, if he cannot vote for the public officials who represent him, if, in short, he cannot enjoy the full and free life which all of us want, then who among us would be content to have the color of his skin changed and stand in his place Who among us would then be content with the counsels of patience and delay? 100 years of delay have passed since President Lincoln freed the slaves, yet their heirs, their grandsons, are not fully free. They are not yet freed from the bonds of injustice. They are not yet freed from social and economic oppression. And this nation, for all its hopes and all its boasts, will not be fully free until all its citizens are free. We preach freedom around the world, and we mean it. And we cherish our freedom here at home. But are we to say to the world, and much more importantly, to each other, that this is a land of the free, except for the Negroes, that we have no second-class citizens, except Negroes, that we have no class or caste system, no ghettos, no master race, except with respect to Negroes? Now the time has come for this nation to fulfill its promise. The events in Birmingham and elsewhere have so increased the cries for equality that no city or state or legislative body can prudently choose to ignore them. The fires of frustration and discord are burning in every city, north and south. Where legal remedies are not at hand, redress is sought in the streets, in demonstrations, parades, and protests, which create tensions and threaten violence and threaten lives. We face, therefore, a moral crisis as a country and a people. It cannot be met by repressive police action. It cannot be left to increase demonstrations in the streets. It cannot be quieted by token moves or talk. It is a time to act in the Congress, in your state and local legislative body, and above all, in all of our daily lives. It is not enough to pin the blame on others, to say this is a problem of one section of the country or another, or deplore the facts that we face. A great change is at hand, and our task, our obligation, is to make that revolution, that change, peaceful and constructive for all. Those who do nothing are inviting shame as well as violence. Those who act boldly are recognizing right as well as reality. Next week, I shall ask the Congress of the United States to act, to make a commitment it has not fully made in this century to the proposition that race has no place in American life or law. The federal judiciary has upheld that proposition in a series of forthright cases. The executive branch has adopted that proposition in the conduct of its affairs, including the employment of federal personnel, the use of federal facilities, and the sale of federally financed housing. But there are other necessary measures which only the Congress can provide, and they must be provided at this session. The old code of equity law under which we live commands for every wrong a remedy. But in too many communities, in too many parts of the country, wrongs are inflicted on Negro citizens, and there are no remedies at law. Unless the Congress acts, their only remedy is the street. I am therefore asking the Congress to enact legislation giving all Americans the right to be served in facilities which are open to the public: hotels, restaurants, theaters, retail stores, and similar establishments. This seems to me to be an elementary right. Its denial is an arbitrary indignity that no American in 1963 should have to endure, but many do. I recently met with scores of business leaders, urging them to take voluntary action to end this discrimination. And I've been encouraged by their response. And in the last 2 weeks, over 75 cities have seen progress made in desegregating these kinds of facilities. But many are unwilling to act alone. And for this reason, nationwide legislation is needed if we are to move this problem from the streets to the courts. I'm also asking Congress to authorize the federal government to participate more fully in lawsuits designed to end segregation in public education. We have succeeded in persuading many districts to desegregate voluntarily. Dozens have admitted Negroes without violence. Today, a Negro is attending a state-supported institution in every one of our 50 states, but the pace is very slow. Too many Negro children entering segregated grade schools at the time of the Supreme Court's decision 9 years ago will enter segregated high schools this fall, having suffered a loss which can never be restored. The lack of an adequate education denies the Negro a chance to get a decent job. The orderly implementation of the Supreme Court decision, therefore, cannot be left solely to those who may not have the economic resources to carry the legal action, or who may be subject to harassment. Other features will be also requested, including greater protection for the right to vote. But legislation, I repeat, cannot solve this problem alone. It must be solved in the homes of every American, in every community across our country. In this respect, I want to pay tribute to those citizens, North and South, who've been working in their communities to make life better for all. They are acting not out of a sense of legal duty, but out of a sense of human decency. Like our soldiers and sailors in all parts of the world, they are meeting freedom's challenge on the firing line, and I salute them for their honor and their courage. My fellow Americans, this is a problem which faces us all, in every city of the North as well as the South. Today, there are Negroes unemployed, 2 or 3 times as many compared to whites. Inadequate education, moving into the large cities, unable to find work, young people particularly out of work, without hope, denied equal rights, denied the opportunity to eat at a restaurant or a lunch counter or go to a movie theater, denied the right to a decent education, denied almost today the right to attend a state university even though qualified. Seems to me that these are matters which concern us all, not merely presidents or congressmen or governors, but every citizen of the United States. This is one country. It has become one country because all of us and all the people who came here had an equal chance to develop their talents. We cannot say to 10% of the population that you can't have that right, that your children can't have the chance to develop whatever talents they have, that the only way that they're going to get their rights is to go in the street and demonstrate. I think we owe them and we owe ourselves a better country than that. Therefore, I'm asking for your help in making it easier for us to move ahead and to provide the kind of equality of treatment which we would want ourselves, to give a chance for every child to be educated to the limit of his talents. As I've said before, not every child has an equal talent or an equal ability or equal motivation, but they should have the equal right to develop their talent and their ability and their motivation to make something of themselves. We have a right to expect that the Negro community will be responsible, will uphold the law, but they have a right to expect that the law will be fair, that the Constitution will be colorblind, as Justice Harlan said at the turn of the century. This is what we're talking about, and this is a matter which concerns this country and what it stands for. And in meeting it, I ask the support of all of our citizens.
As the Kennedy administration was drawing so unwittingly to its close in the early fall of 1963, the civil rights crisis remained unresolved. But surprisingly, it was in the Cold War that the last days of President Kennedy brought one of the most memorable achievements: a treaty signed by the Soviet Union and most of the nations of the world to end the testing of nuclear weapons in the atmosphere. By this time, both countries, of course, had more than enough such weapons to annihilate each other. But the reduction of nuclear pollution of the atmosphere and the symbol which the treaty represented of future pathways to peace made the address of President Kennedy on this occasion a message of hope.
Now, for the first time in many years, the path of peace may be open. No one can be certain what the future will bring. No one can say whether the time has come for an easing of the struggle. But history and our own conscience will judge us harshly if we do not now make every effort to test our hopes by action. And this is the place to begin. According to the ancient Chinese proverb, a journey of 1,000 miles must begin with a single step. My fellow Americans, let us take that first step. Let us, if we can, step back from the shadows of war and seek out the way of peace. And if that journey is 1,000 miles or even more, let history record that we, in this land, at this time, took the first step.
Let us take the first step. Perhaps the most fitting epitaph for an administration and a president which imagined and planned far more new departures in American life and national policy than they would ever have the opportunity to undertake. And of those in which the first step was in fact taken, the first step towards nuclear disarmament, the first great steps toward genuine equality of all Americans in our national life, the first steps along so many broad avenues of this nation's destiny, the second, the third, and the final steps would have to be left to other leaders and to the American people themselves. For on November 22, 1963, John F. Kennedy was shot to death in Dallas, Texas, by an assassin whose motives may forever remain uncertain. As a leader of Americans, his career ended on that day, but in the gallery of great leaders whose vision, eloquence, and inspiring example shaped the minds and imaginations of the American people, his career had only begun. In his inaugural address, John F. Kennedy delivered his best remembered injunction to the American people.
My fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country.
For his country, John F. Kennedy, on November 22, 1963, gave his life.